Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, playing some World of Warships Legends on the PlayStation 4. Today we're going to be taking a look at another premium ship, but not just any premium ship. Today we'll be looking at the Mighty Hood, His Majesty's Tier 6 Royal Navy battleship. As usual, I'll be starting off with some history, then talk about what I think about the ship in the game. We'll run over commander choices, hit the stats, and finish off with some gameplay. If you're not interested in all of that or you want to jump around, I should have left an index in the description. HMS Hood was the first ship ordered in the Admiral class of battlecruisers, which was initially intended to comprise of 4 battlecruisers, each named after a famous Royal Navy admiral. The Hood's namesake was Admiral Samuel Hood, veteran of the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution. Obviously conflicts with various levels of success for the British Empire. Hood was laid down on the 1st of September 1916, though she was not completed for 4 years, until May of 1920. This is a fairly lengthy period of time for a battlecruiser under construction, with previous classes being generally finished within 2 years. Of course, being built during World War I, you can expect the work to slow down, as different ships needing to be repaired from battle damage would obviously jump the line in priority. However, the disastrous outcome of the Battle of Jutland, particularly the detonation of battlecruisers HMS Queen Mary, Indefatigable, and the not-so-aptly named Invincible, slowed the production of Hood as design changes and improvements were considered. Since the middle of the 19th century, capital ships have been experimenting with different armor layouts and technology, but the general trend was for thicker and thicker belt armor. To defeat the armor, more and more powerful guns were invented, and as guns became more powerful, their ranges increased. One of the lessons of the Battle of Jutland for the Royal Navy was the importance of deck armor, though what probably caused so many of their ships to explode was more likely ignoring several safety precautions instead. In any case, ships could no longer count on shells being fired to impact their ships semi-parallel to the water. In other words, they were unlikely to hit the thickly armored belt. Instead, they were falling from the sky, plunging through the relatively thin decks and detonating in the vital areas of ships, including within ship magazines. The Hood would end up receiving a reinforced deck, though most of the additional armor was placed on the front half of the ship. During World War I, Hood's sister ships were all placed on hold, and those orders were finally canceled, meaning when the Hood was built, she would be unique. She received only minor upgrades and refits for the next 20 years, and though Britain was not at war at the time, it was because she was very busy. Being the largest and one of the most handsome ships in the British fleet, she participated in what is known as flying the flag operations, or what we Americans might refer to as gunboat diplomacy, circling the globe and projecting the might of the greatest navy on Earth. HMS Hood might have been more than 2 decades old at the outbreak of World War II, but she was still one of the fastest capital ships in existence at the time. With a considerable armament, though by that point her 15-inch guns were not exactly best in class or considered particularly accurate. And as a small reminder, her class was officially battle cruiser. This is incidentally due to how the Royal Navy classified ships at the time, which what they called any capital ship faster than 24 knots at the time was battle cruiser, even though the Hood was slightly better protected and slightly better armed than the Queen Elizabeth class, which were undoubtedly battleships. At the outbreak of World War II, the Hood was transferred from the Mediterranean fleet to the home fleet, hoping to deter the Germans from trying to sail any of their fancy new ships into the Atlantic Ocean. Following the surrender of the French, she was part of Operation Catapult, which tried to ensure that the French fleet did not fall into German hands. But, thanks to French recalcitrance, the Hood ended up participating in the Battle of Mers al-Kabir, and in this operation, she is generally attributed with sinking the Dunkirk, before trying to run down her sister ship, the Strasbourg, unsuccessfully. Returning to England afterwards, the Hood was scheduled for a refit in 1941, but she would never get that opportunity. Before that could happen, the Germans sent the Bismarck and Prince Eugen to try to break through to the Atlantic. The Hood would sortie against her, and so the Battle of Denmark Strait was set in motion. The exact cause of the Hood's sinking is a subject of some debate and 2 inquiries by the Royal Navy, but the most commonly accepted understanding and the finding of both inquiries goes something like this. At 5:37 on May 24, 1941, Admiral Lancelot Holland ordered the Hood and the brand new cruiser Prince of Wales to begin sailing towards the Bismarck and Prince Eugen at top speed, hoping to close the distance between the 2 ships to a distance where he did not need to worry about plunging fire. The Bismarck opened fire first, with the Hood firing on the Bismarck while Prince of Wales engaged Prince Eugen. The Germans returned fire and scored several hits against the Hood, none of which caused any critical damage. It was just around the time that Admiral Holland ordered a turn to port that the Bismarck fired her 5th salvo. Somewhere in the midst of this turn, Hood suffered a hit to her rear half, just beyond amidships, behind where the Hood's thicker deck armor had been installed upon her construction. The shell entered the magazine, causing a catastrophic explosion that sent a pillar of flame more than 50 stories tall shooting into the air. This tore the ship in half, and within 3 minutes, the Hood slipped beneath the waves, taking 1,415 of its 1,418-man complement with her. For my American counterparts who don't understand why people are so interested in the Hood, the loss of this ship was more deadly than the loss of the Arizona by the United States Navy, and more devastating when you consider that she was the flagship and symbol of British naval dominance for 2 decades before her sudden and shocking defeat. The pride the British people had in the Hood was understandable. Her design was so impressive that she changed the direction of American shipbuilding, namely the Lexington-class battlecruisers, which were never completed. And for all the hype that people feel for the Yamato, whose fame is in no small part due to her sheer size, the Hood was only 2 feet shorter. As far as how the Hood behaves in the game, she actually has a reputation for being somewhat hard to play on PC. I actually found the Hood pretty comfortable once you get used to just how unwieldy she is. Due to her incredible size and above average speed, the Hood doesn't turn very quickly at all. She doesn't really perform very well if you stand at the back of the map and cross your fingers every time you shoot her 15-inch guns. Instead, the Hood is a ship that you're going to want to get inside of sort of medium range, which I generally think of as between 8 and 12 kilometers, and then try to pick apart your opponents. The one real trick to playing the Hood well is trying to think several steps in front of your enemy. Unlike the Iowa or the Richelieu, bow tanking isn't really much of an option here since you only have 4 forward guns, and your forward armor isn't all that incredible. And for that matter, neither is playing the Hood at extremely long range just because of the incredible vulnerability you'll be inflicting upon yourself. Now, to be clear, the Hood does have roughly Tier 5 battleship levels of protection, which isn't bad, but against some Tier 6 and Tier 7 battleship shells, that usually means you'll be taking at least partial damage from every shot. In the Hood, I highly suggest trying to limit the number of engagements you have, because you're not a fully capable, tanky Tier 6 battleship, in spite of your vast hit point pool. But against cruisers, you really do have an opportunity to shine. For the most part, playing something similar to a cruiser, using islands to protect yourself from arcs of fire, or kiting your enemies will get you pretty far in this ship, and definitely try to maintain about the best angle that you can while getting all 4 of your guns to shoot at your enemy. Sometimes you may have to actually just count on 2 turrets. Against pretty much all of the cruisers in the game, a lesser angle is acceptable, but considering the size of the ship and the range where you really do want to play her, there's going to be quite a bit of a problem if you don't play the torpedo game quite right. The nice thing about the hood on Legends is rather than a defensive AA ability, she does come with 2 charges of a relatively weak hydroacoustic search consumable. Now this ship is so big that if you completely open yourself up to being torpedoed, you still might not be able to get out of the way, but this is a really sizable advantage for the hood on console, and it makes her a little bit more interesting to play. For commanders, the short story is obviously you're going to have to choose between Cunningham, Madden, and Jellicoe, and all 3 of these choices are pretty strong. Cunningham is obviously going to give you the best range, most likely the best turret rotation, and definitely the highest accuracy. Unfortunately, this is going to come at the expense generally of the hood's pretty high speed and/or further reducing her lack of maneuverability. John Jellicoe is also a good choice because with fully packed, he's going to give you an extra heal and an extra hydroacoustic search consumable. His base trait is also very useful now that it has been buffed, so it should help your survivability considerably. Unfortunately, the rest of his choices are somewhat underwhelming, though there's no slot that you're really throwing anything away. As usual, Madden is your survivability commander and your potential brawler. I actually don't mind brawler on British battleships because the last 10% of your range is a pretty major danger zone when we're talking about plunging fire. More importantly though, he has the highest potential for survivability with both firefighter and master mechanic. The downside of Madden is that his base trait is actually fairly weak if you've ever sat down and crunched the numbers, though it never can really hurt you. For inspirations, I've listed the top 3 I'd consider for both offense and survivability. The one real note I'd leave here is that if you're going to consider Takeo Takagi, I'd use him as a second choice if you're either using John Jellicoe as your commander or as an inspiration for Madden. Otherwise, his ability is usually going to be less useful than the upgraded Jellicoe ability in just about all circumstances. That said, Britannia ruled the waves for more than a century, and she really didn't take a lot of advice from anyone else. A maximum colonization build is very possible here, where you choose one of the British commanders and inspire him with the other 2. Though, in my opinion, this is probably best with Madden, and that's actually my favorite build, mostly because TacticAngel doesn't like to be on fire 4 times, though not one that you will see today. What you will see today is Cunningham, just because I thought the replay best showed off the strengths and weaknesses of HMS Hood. To keep things easy, we'll be comparing all stats using this build, which will be the same commander that you'll see in the video. For comparison purposes, I'll be actually talking about the Hood versus the Tier 5 ships, HMS Warspite and Queen Elizabeth, for the most part. Now this won't be a fair comparison, but I've received several questions about if the Hood is just another version of this ship. I think the short answer is not really, but I'll go through that point by point. It's a reasonable question, and actually, from a historical point of view, these 3 ships were definitely peers, built around the same time. As we jump into the stats, the first thing we're going to look at is obviously survivability. In terms of survivability, the Hood has a very respectable amount of hit points at 67,700. It actually has more than any other Tier 6 battleship that I could find by a not inconsiderable margin. Its armor here, 13 to 381 millimeters, is not exactly bad, and with a 23% torpedo reduction, that's also acceptable. Now, in terms of how this would compare to the Warspite and Queen Elizabeth, this is the most unfair since they are down a tier, but in terms of armor, you're looking at the heaviest armored areas of the Hood having around 51 millimeters more protection than you'll find on either the Queen Elizabeth or the Warspite. But both of those ships do have a marginal advantage when it comes to their torpedo damage reduction. Both of them feature 28%. For artillery, all of these ships are using 4x2 381mm cannons. The Hood shoots just a little bit farther than either the Queen Elizabeth or a little bit more farther than even the Warspite. It has the fastest turret rotation, beating either of the ships that you might be familiar with by at least 10 seconds. and the reload is around 3 seconds faster than you'll find on either the Warspite or Queen Elizabeth. Now they do the same amount of AP damage, but the Queen Elizabeth does edge it out a little bit in terms of HE damage and has 1% higher fire chance for some reason. In terms of secondary battery, all three feature different types of secondary battery. I wouldn't say that any of them are runaway winners in terms of their secondary battery armament, and I would definitely not suggest that you spec into a secondary build with the hood. So let's just not talk about that, okay? When we're looking at maneuverability, this is kind of a crazy place to look at because it's kind of night and day and it's back and forth in each direction. In terms of maneuverability, the hood is considerably faster than either the Queen Elizabeth or Warspite. It's actually pretty fast in terms of all of the battleships that are available at tier 6. Now you could get something like the Scharnhorst or the Gneisenau to go just a little bit faster, but for the most part, the hood is very quick for a battleship at this tier. That said, the hood, being just ever so slightly shorter than the Yamato, turns at a ridiculously wide 910 meters. Now it does have a faster rudder shift than either the Queen Elizabeth or the Warspite, which is just by a hair. So that means, if you need to make a small maneuver in order to just barely dodge a torpedo, that might work. But if you need to turn around, you will want to schedule an appointment in advance. Then when we get to concealment, none of these ships are particularly stealthy, though you will not be surprised that literally the second largest ship that appears in this game has a slightly worse concealment rating than either HMS Warspite or Queen Elizabeth. Alright, so let's jump into some gameplay. We're going to be on North, and here you see there's the beautiful hood. And as much as the rest of you probably don't really care about this, I actually love this camouflage like an unreasonable amount. And it has mostly to do with, essentially, this is just the normal look of the ship, just really, really clean. And actually, this is interesting because most of the pictures that you see of the hood, it is actually in this condition, largely because the British people took just such pride in this ship that it was pretty much always ship shape on the outside, even if its internals, its actual targeting systems, its boilers, its engines were kind of falling apart towards the end there, but just a beautiful ship. And here we go. We're gonna start paying attention to the actual game. Because obviously the guns are going off. We're shooting out at that Colorado, trying to start ourselves out with a decent bit of damage. At that sort of range and with that sort of angle, you're not going to get a whole lot for the most part with this particular build. Just to remind you, I'm using Cunningham. We managed to land 11,000 damage on the back of that Colorado. We're keeping those guns singing. Accuracy, even with the accuracy captain, not necessarily great. If you're familiar with these guns from the Warspite and the Vanguard, it will probably not surprise you that their performance is pretty similar or kind of in between those two ships. And so, whatever. Every once in a while, you shoot a couple of shells and God only knows what happens, but they don't hit by a lot, like a whole lot. In any case, as you can see, we have moved over to A. Our hope is to try to capture A. I'm not going to do that myself because I don't know how to get this much ship into A without, showing off a whole lot of real estate to shoot. We're just going to hope we capture that and keep it based on the efforts of my team. I'm just here for moral support and occasionally, to run into other people, something like that. Now, since we already have and that Colorado does not look, we'll call it, exceptionally brave, we're going to go and head towards B. As you can see, there are a couple of ships kind of sailing around in the middle of B. We have just one ship trying to deal with them. I'm assuming that's not going to work out for him. So we're going to want to try to help as soon as possible. There you can see he obviously didn't make it. I'm going to try to get some shells out on that Leander. Not great dispersion, but we do manage to land a couple shells, swing that back half around, and just miss. Just miss a ton. Now we're getting up to our maximum speed. You will be able to get higher maximum speeds than the 30 knots that are listed in this review if you choose someone other than Cunningham with this particular build. And you could probably make it all the way up to 34, maybe even 35 knots, depending on your particular choices, which is, just great speed. I look over there, I'm not going to be able to get my guns around in time. That Nelson isn't quite as well angled as he looks, or I should say, he's not as broadside as he looks, so I keep shooting out at him, not getting a whole lot for my efforts, but we do manage to score some decent hits. Now that Leander is coming through that gap. I go ahead, start up that hydroacoustic search, super useful in these sorts of situations. I'm going to start to moderate my speed here because I don't want to have the Leander run up and torpedo me. I'm having a little bit of trouble with my targeting. You know, I'm not good at this game. I'm okay. Anyway, Leander's fairly low. We managed to, I'm not really sure. Then we get some extra shots into him. Now we're going to need to start thinking about both that Leander's getting closer, so he's probably going to torpedo us, and also we see some torpedoes already coming in. In spite of me saying you shouldn't have a secondary build on this, we do manage to finish him off with a secondary shot. But you'll notice I do usually have pretty decent torpedo beat skills. I don't have them here because really there's no way to make that work. I didn't think that I would be able to actually get into a position where I wouldn't still take some sort of damage from those torpedoes, so I just figured slow down, take the one, and make sure to finish off that Leander. Now, it looks like that Nelson is starting to speed up. Nelson, not a particularly well armored ship, but we managed to disappoint ourselves once again. In spite of that, and you might be looking at this and saying, you know, Hood not doing a lot here in the game. We're up to 85,000 damage. It's not exactly a bad game. And we're putting more shells out there. These 15-inch guns have a pretty decent reload speed, all in all. And obviously you can see we get up into the mid-20s, or mid to upper 20s, pretty easily in this ship. It is actually hard to kind of reach the top speed just because the ship is so long. We're putting some more shells out on that Nagato. We're going to take the long way around this little island here because obviously with a 910 meter turning radius, we need to really think about how we're moving. And actually that's a thing that's going to eventually come back to bite me. And we'll talk about that as it starts to develop. I managed to land a couple more shots. Accuracy's decent, as you can see. in terms of what the hood can do, does it feel like a Warspite? No, and it's mostly due to the speed. That's just because you can get around the field so fast, and where the Warspite's really good at little maneuvers to dodge torpedoes in tight spaces because it has that really, really good turning circle. The hood has pretty much the opposite. It has good speed and just abysmal turning. So at this point, we're trying to finish off this Nagato. We're not getting any citadels here, and that, for the most part, it's fairly common due to the short fuse that these particular shells have. And as you can see, with that island fast approaching, I'm going to start to have to make some decisions in terms of which way I want to go. And this is spoiler alert. I don't make the right decisions. I wanted to be able to keep my angle as long as possible there, and I do, but I misjudged just how much room I actually need to turn this ship around. And I've left myself in just a really, really terrible position because I have people at long range that have reasonable accuracy and big guns, and they're just landing them into the backside of my ship. And this is exactly what you didn't want to have happen with the actual hood, and it's definitely not something that you want to have happen in the World of Warships Legends hood either. So I'm trying to back up just enough in order to actually turn my ship in really any other way, and that's the tough part about playing the hood. If you do make a mistake, and if you are out there in the wide open, you leave yourself vulnerable like this, you are going to get deleted from the game. So in this case, you saw a game where I very casually did 122,000 damage and then was very casually removed from the game and sent back to port. And that's kind of the story of HMS Hood. I enjoy this ship quite a bit. I know a lot of people are going to think that it's weird that I actually like this camouflage that's on the ship, which is not at all camouflage. But I have a lot of respect for the hood and just the brave men and women who go out there and actually do serve in the Navy. It's just obscenely dangerous, and I can't begin to express how much I respect that sort of bravery. In any case, the game ends. We're not going to win. There you see, we did do a pretty decent amount of work. We managed to rank on the top of the charts, and of course, even with a loss, you can see the kind of money that you can potentially make if you have a pretty good game. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.